Alright, so thank you for clicking over to part 2. Of course, be sure, subscribe, blah, 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 all that stuff. Do it all. I'd greatly appreciate it, but I don't like to dick around, so let's get right into it. Upcoming fight, we got a nice, solid card. The main event really sells the card, but there are some interesting components to the card up and down, if you look at it closely, and if you're even a marginally hardcore boxing fan, there's a little bit of something for everyone. First, of course, in the main event, you got Calderon challenging welterweight titleist Sean Porter, battle of unbeatens, very similar guys. They, of course, have some differences, but very similar in terms of age, height, reach, all those physical components, and then in terms of whether or not they can bang, they both can bang a little bit, have a little bit of speed to them, a little bit of style to them. Very evenly matched fighters. Of course, in the co-featured bout of the evening, you have a super middleweight rematch between titleist Saki Obika and Anthony Dirrell. They had a pretty good fight last year. It was a draw. Obika walked away with his version of the title. But it was a pretty good fight. Both got rocked a little bit. Both had to overcome some adversity. It was a pretty good fight overall, and we get to see the sequel. And of course you have Luke Campbell, Callum Smith, coming over from the UK, making their US debut as professionals. Both undefeated fighters. I follow both of them pretty closely, especially Callum. He looks to be the goods, and should be interesting to see how they're able to cope with being in slightly unfamiliar situations, for the first time as pros. It'll be interesting to see, at the very least. And of course, you can't have a card nowadays without one glaring mismatch, and of course that comes in this case in the form of Deontay Wilder taking on Jason Gavin. It's not a tune-up though. Just remember that, okay? It's not a tune-up. It's not a stay busy fight. It's just one guy who's unbeaten and has knocked out everyone taking on a journeyman who has really done nothing of major note and who everyone expects to lose. But that's not a tune-up, okay? What I described there is not a tune-up, okay? We just already know who's going to win before the fight happened. But it's not a tune-up. Okay? That's just, that's a different, I don't know what you call that, but you don't call it a tune-up, you don't call it a stay-busy fight. That's according to Deontay Wilder's team. Because they're really trying to sell this fight as something other than, a tune-up. But, okay, it's not a tune-up, sure. It is, but let's say it's not. That'd be great if after I said all this, Jason Gavin pulled off the biggest upset of the year. That'd be great. Make me look like the real dumbass that I am. But in any event, it's a pretty decent card, Even if you're not super interested in the Wilder Gavin contest, you might get to see a pretty... You get to see either an upset or someone probably gets knocked the hell out. That's what's going to happen there. So, there's really no third way about it. That's the way it's going to happen. So, you have that to look forward to, I guess. But of course, the main event is what's interesting me most. It's honestly, aside from the major pay-per-view-ish attractions, the Manny Pacquiao's, the Juan Manuel Marquez's, the Floyd Mayweather's, of course, Saul Alvarez's, I want to say that this fight might be the fight that has most caught my attention. Maybe with the exception of Vasyl Lomachenko versus Gary Russell. I liked that fight, and could have been built up a little better over the long run, but nonetheless, we got it when we got it, and I liked it. And it was turned out to be a very competitive fight that Lomachenko won convincingly, but it was a good fight, and it's always interesting. But aside from that fight, these two fighters are a little more established, a little further on in their careers, obviously, have been through a little bit more as a pro than Lomachenko or Russell. I'm gonna say that this probably is the most interesting non-pay-per-view fight, let's call it, that of 2014, the one that really sort of caught my attention, as I said. And I think the reason for that is, number one, I followed both of them fairly closely. And I like both of them. They seem like likable guys. That's always a good thing. Or at least for me it is. I like rooting for guys that, in theory, I'd want to hang out with. I don't want to, I don't want to be like, this guy's great. It's too bad he's a real dickhead. But, man, is he a fighter? Like, I don't care. I'll still admit he's a good fighter. But it's always nice when he can be an alright human being, too. That's, it's a plus. Not asking for it. But it'd be nice if it was there. And I think they're both talented fighters. battles of unbeatens are always, at least sort of interesting on paper. Someone, in theory, is going to have their record drastically changed in the matter of about 36 to 45 minutes or less. And so it's always, interesting just on paper, at the very least. And, there's some legitimacy at welterweight on the line with the version of the welterweight title there. Of course, the actual champion's Floyd Mayweather, but let's not worry about things like, logic. The fact of the matter is, it's an interesting fight, and they're very evenly matched, which makes it even more interesting, and they both have a lot riding on this. The winner of this fight has their career dramatically changed. I mean, yes, Porter has some good wins with the title-winning performance against Devin Alexander, and stopping Paulie Malignaggi inside 4 rounds, something that had yet to be done up to that point. Yes, he clearly has built a bit more than Brook has. That being said, this sort of win against the guy who's like him, who's there, who's hungry, who's young, who hasn't lost, who really needs this win, to me is probably going to be the best win from a fighter or from a spectator's perspective. This will be the one that really impressed me personally most. Not to say that Brook is better or has proven himself more than Malignaggi or Alexander, but at the very least on paper, there's more riding on the line for both guys here. Not, Malignaggi's career might be closer to the end because of that loss, but he had accomplished enough that if he didn't take the fight, it wasn't going to define him. Losing that fight equally does not define him. This loss could define both Brook and Porter if they lose. So there's a lot riding on the line, and I like those kind of fights. It's a bit unfortunate that one of the guys that I do like will have to lose, but it is still interesting while it happens, and, that's part of the sport. You love some of its uglier components, and you do so happily, because it's the way boxing is. It's not a nice sport. It's very cruel at times, but it makes for very interesting fights. And I did a prediction on the fight for 12rounder.com. You can check that out in the description below, but I'll just give you the person that I'm picking. I'm going with the American. For the record, it has nothing to do with the fact that he's American, but I am going with Porter. I think just experience alone sort of tilted it in his favor for me. Like I said, they're pretty close. They don't fight the same, I'm not saying that, but they have the same sort of intangibles, it would seem. They have the same sort of attributes. The difference is that in their most recent fights, Porter has really looked really good, whereas Brook beat Vyacheslav Zinchenko, but at the same time, he was rocked in that fight. And just after that, in a stay-busy fight, he looked like a fighter that was staying busy, as opposed to a fighter that was on the verge of proving that he is indeed the special one. Again, he says it was hard to get up for that fight, but prior to the fight, he was saying that he's up for the fight because he knows that his future depends on it. So, what are you supposed to believe in that situation? I don't know. All I'm saying is, if you look at their most recent performances, Porter has looked more the goods than Brook has. And I like Brook, and I think he can do better than he did against the guy he just most recently beat. His name escapes me, but I think he can be better than that. I think he can be a more complete fighter than that. But I don't have to think that about Porter. His previous fights, most recent fights, and his overall experiences have shown me that while I can think that about Kell Brook, I do know where Porter is. Maybe I haven't seen the best of Porter, but I know that I've seen him at his best thus far in his most recent fights. And they were against the most experienced guys he fought, and then he gained that experience himself. Not their entire experience, of course, but his own. I can't say the same for Brook, so I gotta side with Porter in this one. That being said, it's still a very interesting fight. And I wrote a little bit about it in my weekly column, Pot Shots. I'll give you the description, or rather the link for that in the descriptions. I wrote a little bit about that in my column about one of the drawbacks to that fight. As much as I'm, touting this fight as a very interesting fight, there are two things that really annoy me. The first one that I didn't touch on as much in the column was that it seems a bit unfortunate that what you remember, or how would I put it? That what's really standing out in this fight is the fact that a lot of people seem to be dwelling on all the negatives that come with it. They're dwelling on whether or not the drug testing is being properly administered or who was asking for it in the first place. They're talking about, well, Porter didn't seem to want the fight. Brook didn't seem to want the fight because it took so long to get it made and finalized and all of this sort of stuff. And then that leads to the next thing that I hated, which is a more particular version of that sort of fight criticism, which is that Brook just cannot get the support you would think he would be getting at this point in his career. He's going over to America to beat a Yank in Yanksville. I don't know what you call it, but whatever you Brits call it. He's coming over here to beat one of America's promising young fighters and to prove that Britain has a fighter that can actually do this successfully, because in recent years that has not, recent year for that matter, it hasn't been the case. British fighters have been coming over here, more particularly English fighters and a couple of Welsh fighters that will remain nameless, have come over here basically to get the shit kicked out of them. And you would think, just based on nationalistic pride, which I do not agree with, for the record, but you would think that in the sport of boxing, a sport that lives off of nationalistic pride in many respects, you would think that you guys, and by you guys I mean, of course, you limey bastards out there, would be a little more behind Brook than you currently are, but a lot of you just aren't at all. Not even like a little bit. It's really baffling to me. I read up recently about how Brook's promoter, Eddie Hearn, was talking about this too. Like, he just doesn't understand where all of this is coming from. He's a nice kid. He's undefeated. He's working hard now. He hasn't always been disciplined, but he's gotten himself in order, and now he's in this position. Just at least hope for the best. But it seems like a lot of British people actually want to see this guy knocked out. And I get it. There's a rivalry between Khan and Brook. Khan is the more popular fighter, so of course his fans are going to hate on Brook. But even that, to me personally, doesn't make sense. Because if you're a Khan guy and your fighter can beat the other guy, why wouldn't you want him to win so that Khan could then make a very lucrative fight with Brook possible, because Brook has a title, and then have your guy beat Brook? Why wouldn't you want your guy to be the guy that beats him? Your guy doesn't get credit just because Brook loses if Brook loses. Your guy has to beat him. That's how your guy gets credit. So even that really, to me, doesn't make sense. You should at least root for the chance for your guy to take Brook's I mean, that's, maybe I'm a weirdo and look at things, logically. But that's just the way I would look at it, personally. But I digress. Fact of the matter is, it's still going to be a very interesting fight. It's still going to be a very interesting card. Second most interesting fight on that card for me personally, Anthony Dirrell. Apologize if I've been getting those names confused, because for some reason I have trouble with them. In any event, Anthony Dirrell taking on Saki Obika in a rematch of a 2013 draw. And I know I shouldn't openly root for a fighter so much, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not rooting against Saki Obika, but I am really heavily going to root the shit out of Anthony Dirrell. That's just the way it's going to be. I've seen what I've seen from Bika, and I credit him. He's a credit to the sport. He's a consummate professional. He's for the most part, a gentleman. He does, even when he, calls fighters out and stuff, he does so in a respectful manner. He's always in shape. He's in great physical shape. I mean, he's 1,000 years old too, which makes it even more of an accomplishment. But I don't want to see him against Carl Froch. I don't want to see him against Andre Dirrell. Lord knows I don't want to see him against Andre Dirrell. Oh my, you know what would be the worst part of that fight? It'd probably be a big enough fight that I'd have to make a prediction on that fight. I'd have to write a prediction out for 12rounder.com. And I'd have to write that out. And in order to do that, I'd have to break the fight down in my head. And I gotta be honest with you. I like Bika as a professional, and I'm a fan of Ward as a fighter. But I think I would bore myself literally to death trying to imagine that fight in my head. I really don't want to do that. And the only way that doesn't happen, for sure, guaranteed, is to make Saki Obika as irrelevant as humanly possible. And I don't mean to say it in such a mean, negative way, but the facts are the facts. Dirrell has to win this fight for super middleweight to be even remotely interesting. It's at least some new blood into a, relatively speaking, stagnant division. It has some names, George Groves is still out there, of course, Froch, is Froch. He's a big draw. Ward, of course, is the legitimate champion. He's, going through his legal issues and all that, but at the very least, he's still there. He's still a great fighter. He's still a name. That division, though, needs some new blood, because if you take Ward out of the equation and you factor in that Froch is probably at best 2, maybe 3 fights away from retirement, if he stretches it that long, he might be one and done. Especially if he comes to Vegas, fights Julio Cesar Chavez, and gets the win. I don't see him risking such a fairy tale ending. You never know, money talks, but I don't see it happening. That division is going to be thin for a while until Ward comes back, and when Ward comes back, who knows if his body isn't calling for light heavyweight by that point, because he's been out of the ring a while now. And with all that being said, it just does need some new blood, and I call me crazy, but I'm just not all that interested in George Groves versus Saki Obika. And I don't think Froch is interested in Saki Obika. I don't think the division wants Saki Obika. And again, I give him all the credit in the world for being a consummate pro, for always showing up, always being on weight to the best of my knowledge, always handling it the way he should. But he's a limited fighter. I've seen his limitations. I don't think the division needs him anymore. This sounds like such a shithead thing to say, but it's just true. I want to see that division thrive. I like super middleweight. It's one of my favorite divisions. I don't know why exactly. It's a division that got overlooked for so long, and then in recent years kind of blossomed into something a little more interesting with Joe Calzaghe, Mikkel Kessler, and then on and on. It's a division that, in a sense, I grew up with. So I always want to see it, I want to see it do well, if you will. And, I'm sorry, but I got to root for Anthony Dirrell. Plus, he's a guy it's easy to root for. It's not that big a deal for me, but it would be nice if he could add some new blood to that division, because I'll be honest, it sort of needs it. In any event, should be, again, a good card overall. Win, lose, whoever wins, whoever loses. I'm sure it'll be a good show for those 2 fights alone. Then the rest of it, whatever happens, happens. But, it should be a good weekend of fights. Almost, in a sense, the antithesis of last weekend, where it was being just looked at as maybe the worst weekend in boxing history or something. I didn't see it like that, but okay. This weekend seems to be getting a pretty decent buzz on both sides of the pond, which is always a good thing, and hopefully we are rewarded with some good fights, which I think we will be. In any event, that about does it for this week. I talked enough shit. I tried to push out verbally enough fighters from the sport of boxing, so I think we're pretty much done here. Of course, be sure to subscribe, follow, like, comment, do all the stuff that, people ask you to do shamelessly. Do all that for me, please. And, I really won't do anything in return, but, I'll keep giving you what I can give you and hopefully entertain you. Just once a day, I think, is really all I need to do. But in any event, just, follow, like, comment, all that stuff. 12-Rounder Boxing, at 12-Rounder Boxing on Twitter. 12rounder.com. Of course, be sure to visit. And, please comment. Love to hear what you have to say. Love to hear you guys bash me for, again, trying to perhaps discredit Saki Obika. Didn't mean it to come out that way, but it's just true. And I'd love to hear all your comments. Give me everything you got. Of course, tell me about how terrible Scott Quigg is for not wanting to fight a guy who's damn near unbeatable. Do all that stuff. Give me all your comments. I'd love to hear from you. And, of course, see you next week.